But when Ar-Pharazon set foot upon the shores of Aman the Blessed, the Valar laid down their guardianship and called upon the One, and the world was changed. Númenor was thrown down and swallowed in the sea, and the Undying Lands were removed forever from the circles of the world. So ended the glory of Númenor. Greetings, my friends. I hope you all are doing very well wherever you are in Middle-earth today. Yoiston here with a long overdue video discussing the rise and fall of Númenor. As this is a video about the entirety of Númenor's history, I will not mention every specific detail that happened, but rather I will talk about the important pieces, and I can cover more specific details in later videos. Let's get right into it and see how this land of blessed men met its end. In the year 32 of the Second Age, the island of Númenor was raised out of the Great Sea of Belegar by the Valar to reward the Edain, the men who had lived in Beleriand during the First Age, for their valiant efforts against Morgoth in the War of the Great Jewels and the other conflicts that ensued. This place was also called Elena, meaning Star Wards, as their first king, Elros Tar-Menútur, led the newly named Dúnedain, or Men of the West, to the island of Númenor while following the Star of Elendil. The descendants of the House of Beor sailed here to escape the troubles of Middle-earth, and so Númenor began to prosper as the land of the High Men. The capital city of the island was called Armenelos, where the kings and queens of Númenor would rule, while the mountain Meneltarma at the center of the island was used as a temple to Ilúvatar, where the great eagles of Manwë would fly. I must also mention the city of Andúne, which was originally the largest city in Númenor, because the elves of Tol Eressëa would often visit there. This was the most western city on the island, closest to Valinor in geography and philosophies. It shall become more important later on. After Elros, the first king of Númenor, passed away, the scepter of Númenor was passed to Vardamir Nolamon before coming to Tar-Amandil immediately. This scepter would be passed from the ruler to the heir, and eventually the sixth ruler, Tar-Aldarion, changed the law of succession to make it the eldest heir of the ruler is crowned, whether that heir was a son or a daughter. Over time, the Númenorians became a powerful race of men, and some of the best mariners in the history of Middle-earth, and they continued to become even greater as the Second Age endured. They were also gifted long lifespans of around 350 years, while those of the royal line lived to be around 400 years old. However, these gifts came with a cost, as the Númenorians were also subjected to their own version of the Ban of the Valar, as the Númenorians were allowed to sail west for as far as they could still see the island of Númenor, as the Valar forbade the men from coming to Aman. But the Númenorians were still allowed to sail to Middle-earth and colonize locations there. In the year 600, the first boats from Númenor returned to Middle-earth under the leadership of the captain of the king's ships, Vaentur. The Númenorians established contact with the middlemen of the world, and the elves who resided in Middle-earth at this time. In the year 630, King Tar-Elendil created the title Lord of Andúne in honor of his grandson Valandil, who would be the first lord. The lords of Andúne would be the descendants of Elros, but in a different line than the line of kings of Númenor. The lords of Andúne would be the leaders of the faithful, as they were called, and they would continue to advocate friendship with the Valar and the elves, even as Númenor darkened. They would also serve on the Council of the Scepter that would help govern Númenor. We will talk about them later on when I mention Elendil the Tall. Moving on, I must talk more about Tar-Aldarion, who was born in the year 700 and would make many trips from Númenor to Middle-earth throughout the course of his life. His journeys would help solidify the alliances between the men of Númenor and the elves of Gil-galad's kingdom. Aldarion would also found the Guild of Venturers in 750, which would be a group of mariners in Númenor. He would also begin construction on Vignalande, or New Haven as it was known, between the years of 739 and 800 in the Second Age, which would be the first of many havens to be built by Númenorians in Middle-earth. Many years later, as Númenor continued to prosper and grow in size, the mariners began to establish more permanent havens in Middle-earth. We can already see just how expansive the Númenorians became in the first half of the Second Age. Eventually, Sauron, who had been under the disguise of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, revealed his true self to the elves of Middle-earth, and he started the War of the Elves and Sauron. Eventually, the Dark Lord overran Eriador in 1699 of the Second Age, and the elves likely would have been doomed had it not been for the valor of the Númenorians under the rule of Tar-Minastir. In 1700, the Númenorians sent a great fleet to help Gil-galad in Lindon, and eventually they defeated Sauron and ended the war. I believe it was at this time that the Númenorians were at the height of their power while also maintaining virtue, for we shall see them gain more of the former and lose more of the latter. With all of this power and dominance in the world, the Númenóreans began to lose sight of the importance of the gift of men, their mortality, and they started to take their positions for granted. The Númenóreans began to become proud and afraid of death, being jealous of the elves and their immortality. Around the year 1800 of the Second Age, the Númenóreans began to establish dominions on the shores of Middle-earth, demanding tributes from their colonies. Númenor began to see some divisions in loyalty between the two factions of the King's Men, those loyal to the kings of Númenor, and the faithful, those that were still dedicated to the Valar and the elves. As the centuries wore on, elvish tongues became forlorn in Númenor, though the kings and queens would still take their names from Quenya, as was the tradition. The Númenóreans would also speak out against the Valar and the elves, and the great eagles of Mount Meneltarma would leave when the Númenóreans became hostile to the Valar. And as Númenor declined, the lifespans of its people shortened as well, giving rise to even greater fears of death. Around this time, the Nazgûl started to appear, and we know that 3 of the 9 were Númenóreans as well. Whether they were already corrupted or not by Sauron at this point is unknown, however. In Middle-earth, the fortress of Umbar would be founded in 2280, and this would be an outpost of the King's Men. In 2350, the fortress of Pelargir was built, and it would be the chief haven of the faithful Númenóreans. Civil unrest in Númenor continued, and Ar-Adun-Nakor, the 20th king of Númenor, outlawed Elvish in his presence, and he was the first to take his kingly name in Andunic, or the language of the West. This king began to persecute the faithful that were still friends of the Eldar and loyal to the Valar. Seldom would the elves still come to Númenor, but they would secretly go to Andune in the west. These dogmatic views against the elves and the Valar continued in Númenor, and they were heightened during the reign of Ar-Gimilzur, the 23rd king, who outlawed Elvish in Númenor completely, and he moved the faithful to eastern Númenor, near the haven of Romena, where he kept watch over those that remained in Númenor, and did not sail to the lands near Pelargir in Middle-earth. This king neglected the traditions of past kings, such as ascending Meneltarma to display reverence to Iru Ilúvatar, and tending the White Tree of Númenor, which was a symbol of friendship between Númenor and the West. The White Tree would soon fall into decline. However, Ar-Gimilzur unknowingly married one of the faithful, Enzilbeth, who taught their eldest son her beliefs. Their son would be the last to take a kingly name in Quenya, and he was known as Tar-Palantir, the Far-Sighted. He would try to restore Númenor's glory in 3175 of the Second Age, but civil war would happen instead. This king's gift of foresight prophesied that if the White Tree ever perished, the line of kings would come to an end, so he properly tended it once more. He would also continue the ancient religious ceremonies of Númenóreans. However, Tar-Palantir's repentance was not enough to save Númenor from its past declines, and the rebellions of Númenor's people. The elven ships never came from Tol Erissa to Númenor again, and the site of Erissa was even withheld from Tar-Palantir. Darkness had come to Númenor, and not even Tar-Palantir could save it. Eventually, Ar-Pharazon, the king's nephew, would marry Tar-Palantir's daughter, and he became the 25th and final king of Númenor in 3255. After Ar-Pharazon's rise to power, Sauron, who yet lived in Middle-earth, taunted the Númenóreans into war, and so Ar-Pharazon gathered a large host. And from 3261 to 3262, Ar-Pharazon landed in Umbar and captured Sauron in Mordor. Their forces were so daunting and great that Sauron's servants abandoned him, and the Dark Lord was forced to improvise. And so Sauron took on a fair form and humbled himself before Ar-Pharazon the Golden. However, when Sauron was taken back to Númenor, the fallen Maya quickly corrupted the people of the island. Within 50 years, Númenor had almost completely fallen, as the king's prized prisoner became his greatest advisor. The old traditions were gone. The Council of the Scepter had been disbanded, and a temple dedicated to Melkor was built where human sacrifices were held. Nimloth the Fair, which was the name of the White Tree of Númenor, was also burned, and the Great Armament began construction. The Great Armament was a naval force that was created for the purpose to overthrow the Valar and seize immortality for the men of Númenor. However, hope remained in the faithful. Amandiel, the last lord of Andune, sailed to Aman with 3 trusted servants to warn the Valar about Ar-Pharazon's plans, and though Amandiel was never heard from again, I must believe that he was successful, as the Valar knew what was to come. Towards the end of days of Númenor, Manwë sent storm clouds in the shape of his great eagles to warn the Númenorians of their impending doom. Finally, in 3319 of the Second Age, Ar-Pharazon landed with his host in Aman, and the Valar called upon Iru Ilúvatar for aid, as they were not allowed to fight the children of Ilúvatar directly. And so Iru did intervene in this moment, and it would be one of the only times in Middle-earth's history that he would do so. Ilúvatar buried Ar-Pharazon and his men on the shores of Aman, and he made the world round, taking Aman and Tol Eressë out of the sphere of the earth so that men could not go there again. It is stated in later volumes of the history of Middle-earth, however, that the world was always round, and the Númenorians believed that it was flat. But that is a point of contention within the lore that allows for an alternative story to take place concerning these events. But for the sake of this video, we'll stick with the idea that the world was changed during the Downfall of Númenor. Around the world, many shores, islands, and coastlines would be changed due to this event. Númenor was flooded, and the island sank beneath the waves. But 9 boats escaped from eastern Númenor, and in them were the faithful who yet bore the Palantiri, the Ring of Barahir, the Scepter of Annúminas, Narsil, and a fruit of Nimloth the Fair that Isildur, son of Elendil, had stolen from the White Tree of Númenor the night before its destruction. That first sapling would eventually be planted in Minas Ithil, and it would become the first White Tree of Gondor. Sauron and his followers among the Númenorians were destroyed in the downfall, but Sauron's spirit endured and returned to Mordor. The faithful would establish the realms in exile in 3320 of the Second Age, and they would be called Arnor and Gondor in Middle-earth. And these 2 kingdoms would carry on in the memory of fair Númenor, and in spite of corrupted Númenor and its survivors and descendants that still dwelt within Umbar and Harad in the south. The Kingsmen would become the Black Númenorians, and they would be dominated by the Dark Lord Sauron through the end of the Third Age. And so Arnor and Gondor lived on, remembering and honoring their ancestors that embodied what men should be before the downfall of Númenor. I see their reverence for Númenor alike to the love that the elves bear for Valinor and Beleriand. And for many of the Dúnedain, the times of fair Númenor were the elder days of men. From the rise and downfall of Númenor, we may learn to not let our ambitions and pride overcome our virtue in life, as the Númenorians did. We must never become complacent in how good we believe we are, as we can always become better, for there is always hope. We must remember to remain faithful to one another, so that we are not blinded by our own fears or ambitions. Thus we may avoid our own personal downfalls and continue to become better people throughout our lives. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this history. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this video with a friend. So what do you all think about Númenor? And what other videos would you like to see me make concerning Númenor, its geography, peoples, or history? Please, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to contact me more directly, please be sure to join us on Facebook and Twitter through the links in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. Tomorrow I will have an announcement about more growth for this channel, so I hope you all look forward to that. Next week I'll be doing another overdue video that I talked about doing last summer, an epic character history on Samwise Gamgee. In the meantime, thank you all for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.